All right. Well, welcome again, everyone. I'm Clyde, one of the Dharma leaders here at IMC Charlotte, and apparently there was a lightning strike this weekend at the church, and they have not gotten internet everywhere it needs to be. And maybe some places, but it wasn't in here. So thanks to Greg coming in, and we're on his hotspot, his personal hotspot, so we now have access here through the internet, so people on Zoom can be with us tonight. So welcome. And so tonight, I'm going to be talking about a recent experience I had, and this experience, and what was interesting about this experience, it was on the right glasses so I can see. I wanted to relate to you how I related to the experience, how I went through the experience based on using the teachings and the practice. And the interesting thing I saw about this was when I was going through it, and not when I was actually going through the experience, but later on, I saw how that's what I like about these teachings we have. Not only does it teach, the teachings tell us this is what's happening. And then it kind of says, okay, and then here's the practice, here's how you deal with it. And the first part of it is, and that's the Buddha just, didn't say, well, go do this. He says, this is why you are suffering, and explains it. Then he says, here's how you can reduce your suffering if you do these practices. And hopefully you'll see that as I go through this experience I had. As you know, as several of you know, 3 months ago, I went on a trip to Ireland and Scotland with some friends of mine from Charlotte here. And it was a great trip. We got into Ireland. We might have spent some time in some pubs, okay? But we came through, we went over into Scotland. We went up to Scotland. We went up to the Highlands of Scotland, and it was cold and rainy. And then we got back down to Edinburgh. And for a couple of days, I've been having some sniffles, and I got a little bit of a cough. And I thought, well, I'm traveling with friends, maybe I should test myself. So I went and got one of the little COVID testing things. And sure enough, I had COVID. And I was like around my friends, okay, I need to not be around my friends. You don't have to, at that point, you didn't have to quarantine. When I got the test, we don't have to quarantine. I went and got an official test. You don't have to quarantine, but just stay in. And if you go out, wear a mask or something. And I knew, and so once that moment happened, once I saw that little red line, well, here I was in Edinburgh. It changed everything. Everything changed. And my friends were going on. I was scheduled to come back in 3 days. I was to get on a plane. I knew that was not going to happen. My friends were going on. They were going on down into England and do some travel for another week. But I was coming home. But the things that happened when that happens is that it was like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? I had a hotel room for 3 more nights. I had a plane ticket that I had to cancel my plane ticket. I had a dog that was here staying with someone. I had to find out whether they could keep my dog. And the question is, how long are you going to keep my dog? Because how long can I have to stay here? I had to do all this. So the first couple of nights, first day, I was like in my room trying to, what does the CDC say I can do? How long does it take? What do I have to do? You have to find a doctor and do all this. So I was pretty focused when I was those first couple of days. And then my friends would wave at me through the window or drop something off at the food at the door. But by then I was 5 days in because I'd already been sick for 3 days. And no one up there was masking. So we laughed about it. Said everybody's going to get it, but I was the only one that got it. But it changed everything. So the morning, then they left one day. Said goodbye to them. They went off. Well, I was alone. And that afternoon was really hard for me. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know when I was going to go home. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if what I was doing was the correct thing. There was a lot of uncertainty of it going on, and I got caught up in it. And I was really down. That night I was like, oh, I was so sad. How long am I going to be here? What am I going to do the next 4 to 5 days? How many days is this going to be? I began to realize how much uncertainty is important, is a fear for me. When I got up the next morning, I had to change, the next morning, when I was supposed to be flying home, I had to change hotels. Couldn't stay in the hotel I was in. That's when my mindfulness really kicked in. And I began to see what was happening. I began to see this thing that we talk about, Papancha, in here. We talk about Papancha. And my mind would just take off and go, what was going on? What was going to happen? Why did this happen to me? What's going on? When am I going to get home? All these things were going on. And I began, because I was able to see it, I was like, wait a minute. This is my mind being called up. And they were all thoughts. They were all these thoughts. Andrew Olinsky, he says, these are the narrative loops that play over and over in the mind. The trains of thought pulling out of the station one after another and taking us for a long ride down the track before we even know we're aboard. Bhikkhu Bodhi says he calls Papancha the propensity of the worldlings, that's me, imagination to erupt in an effusion of mental commentary that obscures the bare data of cognition. In other words, a thought comes up and it's just a thought, and then we add all this stuff to it. And that's what I was doing. Well, I'm here. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Lee Brasington, I love the way he calls it this. He calls it this. It's the mind. It's the unbidden going of the mind to so many different subsequent thoughts. That unbidden going of the mind. And I know you've all experienced this. You probably experienced it just a little while ago while you were sitting there trying to meditate. I know I was, because I was figuring out what was going on, all this. It happens. It's a very natural thing. So it's something that we all experience, that we all deal with. And it's also pretty important. It's very important in the Buddha's teachings. And I'm going to read a part of this. Is Lee Brasington kind of paraphrasing one of the suttas. It's the Majjhima Nikaya number 18. The Papancha is not really explained directly in the suttas. It kind of goes around the different ways to say it. But this is why it's pretty important. There exists in the mind the very strong tendency for thoughts to proliferate. Another thing you call this mental proliferation. These thoughts lead to various concepts. The concepts that we take delight in, we hang on to, we believe them to be true. By hanging on to erroneous concepts, we wind up with lust, aversion, views, doubt, conceit, desire for being, and ignorance. These unwholesome states of mind lead to taking up weapons, quarrels, disputes, recrimination, malice, and false speech. This is the important part about recognizing these concepts for what they are, that they have arisen purely from the mind's tendency to proliferate. It's simply from the mind's tendency to proliferate. We don't take them to be the truth, and we don't become mired in these unwholesome states. I was mired in an unwholesome state over and over and over. I was that Tuesday, I was mired in that state. I was down, I was sad, I was like, what's going on? I'm feeling sorry for myself. The next morning, I saw what was happening. Because of my mindfulness, I could see, wait a minute. This is just the mind adding these stories to this. And I was in that unwholesome state. The Buddha actually recognizes that the mind's tendency toward Papancha is unavoidable. And instead of fighting the inevitable, he teaches us how to ride and tame the tiger. So this is the first part of this, where the Buddha is explaining why I was suffering because of Papancha, because my mind tends to proliferate and it causes suffering. It goes into these unwholesome states. But that's why I was suffering. It's like, they're suffering. That's the first noble truth. This is why. So the second part of this is, what did I do once I recognized what was happening? How do you tame the tiger, so to speak? And there's lots of ways to do it, but I can show you the way I did it. I really came, well, that morning, that Wednesday morning, I had to keep coming back to this moment. I was walking around a lot because I was out of one hotel, couldn't get into the other hotel until later on. Now, one thing I will say, I had a very mild case of COVID. I mean, I hardly knew I had it. I took a Sudafed in the morning. I walked 20,000 steps like 3 days in a row because I couldn't get out doing anything but outside walk, because I was in Edinburgh and I'd already been in the museums when I had COVID. So I was staying out and I was trying to walk around. It was a beautiful day. I was in the botanical gardens and all this. So I was very fortunate I could get out and do things. But I had to keep coming back to this moment. This moment is like this. This moment is like this. And this moment is okay. This moment is okay. I could see, and when I could see that Papancha, when I started adding things, well, what's going to happen about this? What's going to happen about this? I would see that happen and go, this moment's okay. You know, when here we say a lot, what's the definition of suffering? Wanting things to be different than the way they are. Well, every other thought that I was having was, I want this to be different. I'd be in the gardens, beautiful gardens here, and in the back, and I'd be looking at them, walking around, it's beautiful, and that thought would come up, but I don't want to be here. And I had to recognize that's what that is. I want to be what that is. Now, I'm not pushing away these thoughts. I'm not, like you said, we don't want to push away the thoughts. We want to recognize them and see what they are, and then come back to this moment, this breath. In the mornings, I would wake up and go, what am I going to do today? I have all day long. And I don't know when I'm going to leave this country. What am I going to do next? Can I get out of this country? When is it going to happen? And I would do a body scan. You know, I would just start, what are the sensations in my body? What's going on? What it's doing is it stops that train of thought. It helps to stop that Papancha taking over. I would come back to my body, and then I would get up and I would go and do things. But it was something I had to constantly kind of work on and do. But the practice was there for me to use. I would come back to like I would just say this is okay. The other thing you need to do is important to do is notice when it is okay, when that moment is okay. All right, this moment is really okay. I'm not having to fight it. It's just when we always talk about, you know, replacing thoughts and doing that and seeing when things are when we're suffering. We want to see when we're not suffering too. Oh, this is nice. Oh, I went for 5 minutes without having that thought about I don't want to be here. Notice that also. That's important to see that also. We want to be with what's arising in this moment. There was anxiety. There was always the fear coming up. There was this uncertainty that really bothered me a lot. And I had to just, okay, this is uncertainty right now. Yeah, I don't know when I'm coming on. That's uncertainty. And I can be with it because of my practice. I can be with this. So I trust in my practice. This was a quote from Lions Roar one time. It says, this was being overwhelmed. I was feeling overwhelmed sometimes. What is the difference between the actual problem posed by my situation and my perception of and feelings about my situation? Now, what's the difference for the actual problem? I can't get this thing up. The internet connection's not working. I mean, this happened to me 30 minutes ago. You know, what's going on here? What am I going to do? What are we going to do? People are waiting to come up. You know, what's the actual problem? And then what's my feelings? Well, we're going to figure this out. We're going to work it out. So you look at your feelings about that and look at they're different. That was the main thing that I did, was really come back, use this moment, grounding, walking. You know, I'm walking. I put my feet down. Okay, this moment's like this. The second thing that I did, and that's what we talk about in here as far as our practice, is gratitude. I would come back to gratitude practice. That's one of the strongest ones that I use. like I said, I had a real mild case. I was gratitude. I wasn't that. I was healthy. I mean, relatively healthy. I had a place to eat. I'm fortunate I had the resources that I could get another hotel. Just to let you know, I do have travel insurance, but they didn't pay for the whole thing. But so I was fortunate that I had the resource. I didn't think about that. My dog was taken care of. My friends were texting me, how are you doing? They were down in England. They were, how are things going? I'm doing okay. I was alone. I was lonely. That was because it was just days you had to put in the time to get to this point where you could get this certificate to get out of the country. But being gratitude, just having gratitude for I've got food here, I'm healthy, I'm in this beautiful place. Come back to that gratitude, and that would stop those thoughts. That would help stop the papancha. Just come back to gratitude. It's a very powerful practice. The third thing I did as part of our practice was I did a combination of metta and compassion. Joy talked about using compassion last week. And I would give metta to myself. And with compassion, I looked at it more from the standpoint, this is a new situation you've been in. You haven't been in this. I asked my friends, I was talking to people, I traveled, no one knew what to do. This is new. This is kind of scary. This is a new thing. Give yourself a break. That's what compassion is. Give yourself a break. You don't know what's going on here. This is new for everyone. So I would hold a little bit of compassion. And I would also expand that compassion out. And I didn't want to discount what I was going through, but I had also thought about what was going on in the Ukraine. People were leaving their homes, not know if they were ever going to come back. And I would send compassion and metta to them. And what it does is it just kind of expands. I was in a difficult situation, but it expands that. And when I did that, it would stop. Those thoughts would just kind of, quit coming up quite as often. So using that for myself and for others broadens that, and it broadens that whole perspective on things. And then the mind just kind of, okay, I can't catch you on that one. The mind wants to catch you. Once it gets a hold of you, it's going to keep going and get you into those unwholesome states and those areas where you're going to suffer. So that was kind of my experience during that. And I had several days where I had just time on my hands to do that. And that was probably part of the problem too, because I had so much time but nothing I could really do. But I would use these practices. Using my breath, doing being very mindful of what was arising in this moment, gratitude for what I had, and metta and compassion. So those are the things I use to help stop the papancha from taking over. And what it does, it takes over, and we end up suffering. And that's what I was able to realize that Wednesday morning. I used it for several days, and things still came up. This uncertainty was there. There was fear there. That thought of I didn't want to be here kept coming up all the time. They were having the Queen's Jubilee. I did not want to be in England for that. Everybody's, oh, it's so great, you'll be there. No, I don't want to be here. But it would help stop this, what we call this papancha, this mental proliferation that we all experience. And the instructions also say things like, this is from Lee Brayson, was like, that they say that meditation is the best antidote to papancha. Because when we're meditating here, we see what's arising. When we see us adding thoughts to things that arise in our meditation, we recognize that, we come back to our breath. That's that mindfulness moment. We can come back. So the more we practice meditation and mindfulness, the more we can be aware of what's happening in this moment. The main purpose of, I believe Bracing says, the main purpose of calming the mind is to slow the tendency towards mental proliferation. when we get in here, we meditate, we're able to calm our minds, it slows that propensity that the mind has. Once the mind is not running off in every direction, it can more easily see things as they are. It can see the three characteristics of all phenomena. And I'm going to touch on these just briefly. They are the impermanence. You know, I kept seeing impermanence coming up, like this is going to be impermanent. I'm going to get home. I saw stressful. There was stress going. There was suffering going on. I was able to see that when I slowed down. And the idea of this non-self, a lot of my mental proliferation was around, what am I going to do? What's going to happen to me? Why did this happen to me? What am I going to do? A lot of this, all about me. And when I saw, and you can see that when the mind slows down, so let's broaden this out, let's make it broader. So this mental proliferation is really kind of something that I'm going to get one more definition of it from Andrew Olinsky. The tensive mind is spreading out. There's no term for it, it's spreading out. To spread out from and elaborate upon any sense object that arises in experience, smothering it in wave after wave of mental elaboration. I'm sure you've had that experience. Number two, most of which is illusionary, repetitive, and even obsessive. Because when this starts, it gets repetitive, obsessive, and we keep going on and on and on. And number three, which effectively blocks any sort of mental calm or clarity of mind. So that's what that Papancha is doing. Once it hits that, once it gets in there, it clouds the mind. And that's where I was. That's what happened. And I know most of y'all, all of y'all have experienced this. And so just be aware of that. And that's what I liked about this concept was that the Buddha explained, this is why you're suffering. And then this is how you can reduce your suffering. Thank you.